.66 degrees outside at 15 minutes past the 8 o'clock hour on this Tuesday, September the 19th. Chris Lenois back with you for one more hour on the Green Mountain Mornings program, and joined in the studio by Harmony Birch, staff reporter for the Brattleboro Reformer. Good to see you, Harmony.
Good to see you.
And good to have the folks from Brattleboro Community Television in here as well. And they are here thanks to the support of Brattleboro Savings and Loan. They are a ultra-local programming sponsor for BCTV live events, municipal meetings, and our segments with members of the local media like Harmony. Harmony, a couple stories that you had this week really showing the Brattleboro Reformers pro-canine, anti-feline stance. I had no idea that you were such cat bashers at the Reformer.
You know, I really love cats, and I know there are multiple employees who also really love cats.
Right.
So I'll just put that out there for the record.
Okay. Do you own a cat?
I don't. Okay. Because I'm not responsible enough.
Because you think cats should be free and independent. No, anyway, I was going to give you tease you a little bit about the headline "Careless Cat Starts Fire" in the story about the Molly Stark Motel fire for the Brattleboro Reformer. But then, actually, you were just telling me before we went on that people are actually taking this a little too seriously out in the community.
One woman has called me, and I believe she called my editor and threatened to cancel her subscription. That is all I've heard of it. I've heard at least one person be angry about it.
Okay. I mean, it's what happened, right? I mean, the Molly Stark Motel, there was a fire there, and it was caused by a cat.
Yes, it was caused by a human who had a candle lit, and then the cat knocked it over.
Okay,
so it was an irresponsible human, perhaps.
The cat didn't light the candle. The cat just went by and knocked it over. With this fire starting, the thing that was a question to me, cats and candles in a motel. Neither of those things are things you normally associate. Actually, I would associate a cat where you have pet-friendly motels and places versus, hey, bring your own candle in and light a candle in the room. That's not something you see. Are there people at the Molly Stark Motel who are residents, or are they all like short-time guests? Are there long-time residents sort of situation at the Molly Stark?
I'm not really sure because this came out after I was on the scene, and so a lot of this information I got from the press release, like right before deadline.
Right.
But there was some language that suggested that there was perhaps residents, and I talked to the owner of the motel, and he was talking about that being an office space.
Oh, okay.
As well, I believe so.
Okay, so this wasn't necessarily one of the guest rooms where the candle was and where the cat was.
Yes, but I can't confirm that.
Okay, can't confirm that. But I mean, this was just one of those questions that I had about it. I mean, because it sounded like it ended up being a relatively serious fire, but certainly the fire alarm systems they had in place sounded effective in this case.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk a little about that response.
Well, the fire alarm systems obviously notified whoever was in that office space, and it seemed as though the timing, they got the call, and then right after, people were already calling. So I think that the fire progressed really fast, because as soon as the police got the call, almost immediately after, other people were giving the call being like, I see flames. So, but they were able to kind of save the majority of the motel, it seems.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like it was damage that has it closed the motel. Do we know if the motel is closed at this point?
I do not know that.
Okay, that's something worth checking out there as far as. But and unfortunately, 3 cats lost in the fire and 1 person treated for smoke inhalation. Now, I think the cat bias aspect of this wouldn't have been as prominent if it weren't for just how pro-dog your story about this canine unit in Westminster is as far as sniffing out these 1,000 bags of heroin. But this is actually pretty cool as far as the details of this stop and the dog's role in it.
Yeah, so the dog has been around for a while, and the dog, they employed the dog because they stopped a car that they suspected had something funky going on with it. And the dog kind of signaled to people when he found the drugs.
What is a dog signal for this? Do we know?
I assume it's barking.
Right. Drugs, right?
I actually, this week I have scheduled a time to go and follow the dog on his kind of route.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Are they
I guess I'll find out.
And the dog's name is Caesar.
Yes, the dog's name is Caesar. He's had a hell of a career, according to Ron Lake. So
it's a great picture. He looks very proud of the picture that the Bellows Falls Police Department of him standing in front of it. I guess this is a submitted photo. It's not necessarily the drug bust, but he's sitting in front of some drugs here in this photo, right?
Yes.
I caught these people, and that's a very cool thing. But they're not making Caesar available for comment to the press, I notice.
Oh, well, no, I guess not. I mean, I don't speak canine, so.
Oh, okay. So you're going to have a translator with you when you follow the dog around on this?
I can try. I don't know who I could have. I guess Bob could probably translate for me. He seems to speak dog.
Bob speaks dog?
Yeah, I could see Bob speaking dog.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good to know. But with this bust of this person, Josh... Where's the name on here? I'm looking for on the story here. It's on the first page of the article here, and now I'm missing it. But the bust of Josh Williams from Bellows Falls. Do they think, as far as the 1,000 bags of heroin that he was carrying, are they thinking that he is somebody of interest or low level? You know, when you go through this sort of investigations into drugs and you discover such a $15,000 amount. Worth of drugs is pretty high. Where do they think Josh Williams falls on this kind of line of dealing and distribution?
They said that this was a significant drug bust. I don't know that much about what's going to be done with Joshua Williams. They haven't released the affidavit yet, right. And they're pretty tight-lipped during the investigative process. So we'll see.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's exactly the point I want to make. Your conversations with Chief Lake seem to indicate the quantity of drugs was the significant part of this, not the person who they arrested. And sometimes when you get these stories about arrests, they say, well, we've got the person who we think is sort of like the regional person or whatever it may be. So I kind of read between the lines in that regard.
Yeah. And Ron Lake believes that this isn't going to change Bellows Falls' heroin problem. So I imagine that Joshua Williams isn't the person of that area. If the drugs were indeed, come out to be his. But it was a significant bust for the Bellows Falls PD.
Yeah.
The point was that, hey, we found these drugs.
Yeah. I mean, that's great, and a great job by Caesar to sniff them out and signal, and we'll find out what those signals are. I'm looking forward. When are you doing that story of following Caesar around?
Wednesday or Thursday, maybe? Maybe Wednesday.
Wednesday, Thursday. All right. So we'll be looking for that story and future editions of the Brattleboro Reformer, as well as online at reformer.com. Harmony Birch doing some human-related stories as well as these animal stories in the past week. We'll get to some of those when we come back after the bottom of the hour news break. 66 degrees outside at 21 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. Green Mountain Mornings continuing now. Your host, Chris Lenois, in conversation with Harmony Birch of the Brattleboro Reformer about some of the stories she's been covering in the Brattleboro area and the Bellows Falls, Rockingham area. That's been your beat since joining the Reformer as a staff reporter. And what a time to come into that community here with this struggle over what to do after everybody in town voted a reduced budget amount that led to the elimination of the full-time firefighters in the department, and a complaint lodged by the firefighters to the Labor Relations Board in the state about this process. Now, last time you and I talked, that complaint was sent back to the firefighters because they needed some clarification on some things. So that's done. So at this point, we have a revision of the previous complaint and just kind of bring listeners back up to speed on what is in this complaint that the firefighters filed.
So the firefighters are saying that they didn't get enough notice to the layoffs, essentially. And they really want these layoffs that happened to the fire department to be rescinded.
Right.
And that is the big update here.
Right.
And that's essentially what they're claiming. They thought that there was some wrongdoing on the board in terms of the village meeting day, and they thought that one of the board members had made some comments publicly about them that they didn't like, and their big thing is that they really just want to keep their jobs.
Do we? Yeah. Well, and with good reason. I certainly sympathize there. When you talk about the notice, they're actually still employed, right? I mean, at this point, we were talking like once they made this vote, it was 120 days before
Yes.
it went into effect. So that hasn't elapsed yet.
No.
So that's a difficult thing for the Vermont Labor Relations Board, I imagine, to evaluate with this. I wonder if there is a particular grounds in a statute that would allow the Labor Relations Board to rescind a decision by town voters. I mean, this is really a budget issue for the town. Any sense of if there's a precedent for this?
I don't know. I've tried to ask Timothy Noonan, who's the executive director of the Vermont Labor Relations Board, and he's kind of been tight-lipped about it. I do know that Bellows Falls has never gotten a unfair labor practice before that we know of, at least since the 70s.
Because the question becomes, if, say, the Vermont Labor Relations Board grants this rescinding request and says, yeah, you can't fire the firefighters, what does the town do at that point? Is there any sense on what the path is for the town? They have to go back and find those cuts somewhere.
Well, they have overspent their budget in the past. And I think it's my understanding that they could overspend it again. It essentially would just make village members really angry and upset. But I think that they could spend that budget. It just would not follow what the people voted for.
Right. Now, the Village of Bellows Falls has to submit a response by the 22nd of this month. So that's coming up soon. Is that a publicly available document? Are you going to get a copy of that to report on?
I imagine so.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have a sense of when the Labor Relations Board would make their decision on this case.
Oh, boy. Timothy Noonan told me a while ago. I think it's something like 15 days or I don't know. It's a process.
Not a protracted period of time, though. I mean, especially if you're talking about this. I mean, we are well into that 120-day period of where the firefighters are on notice that their jobs are being defunded. So we'll see. I think this is all going to move pretty quickly from here on out. And in the meantime, Bellows Falls is put in place a fire department implementation committee. I was hoping that had some sort of, really handy acronym, but it really doesn't. It's a whole lot of consonants there when you're talking about Bellows Falls Fire Department Implementation Committee. You went to one of their meetings last week, and it was in the weekend edition of the paper here. First of all, before we get into what was discussed at this committee meeting, give us a sense of the committee makeup. Who's on this? Who are the members of this committee? So
we have Sandy something or other. Everyone in Bellows Falls knows him as Sandy.
Sandy.
Yeah, just Sandy. Yeah. He used to be a trustee board member back in the day. And then we have a couple of people who are working in the Bellows Falls Fire Department. That's Larry something or other. And as well as Sean McGinnis. Mm-hmm. So they both work in the Bellows Falls Department right now. And then we have Wade Measure, who works in Rockingham Fire Department, and Gaetano, who is a select board member and works. And then we have President Miles Mickle of the trustee board and James McAuliffe of the trustee board. Another trustee there. And I think that's important as they're making this decision. There are firefighters who are at the table on this. This isn't just the town trying to figure this out and sort of excluding the voice of the firefighters. So when we get into what they're discussing here, they've put together a range of options here, 5 different options that you lay out in this, ranging anywhere from just over $250,000 to $600,000. Some of those ones in the middle seem to be the ones that are kind of the lower end of the cost to the middle. A couple of different models there. What in those preferred models is it that the committee is leaning towards? What do they like about those 2 models? So number 2 and number 3 is an on-call department with a stipend in chief. And then number 3 is an on-call department with 1 full-time fire member. And that seems to be, to my understanding, where most of the committee members are leaning at. However, that is one of the more expensive costs. And so they're open to whatever the trustees decide because they understand that we may not be able to afford that right now. Oh, that wouldn't be so a 1 full-time chief of the department would be outside the scope of the budget that they voted on. We don't know. We don't know. Okay. It could be because they haven't made those other cuts yet. Right. Okay. That makes sense. But you're talking about a situation where they're trying to balance safety and professionalism with some of their cost measures. Yes. Yeah. And I believe what they've been talking about, because of the fire members on the committee, they've been talking about whether or not they could do it with an on-call or an all-volunteer department. And based off of the other models around the area, they feel like an on-call department would be best because it gives incentive to those volunteers. And it's not really about the money. It's just about being like, we appreciate you. Here's, a little bit of money to kind of show our appreciation.
I would imagine a decision on how to move forward sort of has to align with whatever comes out of this Vermont Labor Relations Board decision.
The fire committee has not talked about that at all.
Okay.
And
So they haven't set forth any kind of when we're going to make a decision timeline on this.
They kind of have. They're deciding within the next 2 or 3 meetings of the fire committee. So that'll be within the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then they're going to present their recommendation to the trustee board. And then it's really up to the trustee board. So the fire committee can say, hey, this is what we like, but the trustee board can completely disregard it if they choose.
Well, all right. We'll see what they do choose to do based on the recommendations and what happens with the complaint from the firefighters. There was another piece of business discussed at this fire committee meeting, and it's at the end of your story in the weekend edition, having to do with this alarm system in town, a fire department alarm system. This is a situation where there's kind of almost like a master system for specifically those buildings within the village.
Yes, that is my understanding. It's a little bit confusing, and there's been some confusion at the trustee board meetings and at the fire committee meetings as to what exactly this alarm system entails.
But the different businesses in town or building owners pay the fire department in order to be part of this alarm system to the tune of almost $10,000
yes.
A year.
Yes.
And the fire committee wants to get rid of this. Why?
Well, the alarm system, some of the committee members are saying really isn't up to date. And they've built new buildings and they weren't able to access this alarm system code.
Right.
And it's all of these buildings have to have some sort of alarm system. So really what they have to do is just call another company and start paying them money for the alarm system. But it would cost the village theoretically a lot of money to redo this alarm system. And so the committee wants to do away with it kind of as soon as possible, or they want to set notice as soon as possible to let businesses know, hey, you have to go somewhere else for your alarm system needs.
And possibly, no sense of whether that's more expensive, less expensive than what the town is charging them, it sounds like. McAuliffe, James McAuliffe in this meeting with the trustees saying the trustees were doing this for the money, comparing it to legalizing marijuana, which is, I can't make heads or tails of that analogy. When you're talking about safety of the buildings that this fire department is supposed to protect here. Was there any discussion? It doesn't sound like there was much discussion, if any, around how effective this fire alarm system has been for the town.
So
it seems like it's all been about the money and not, well, does it work?
Well, that's what it does work. But what you need is somebody in the firehouse 24 hours a day. And the committee can't really guarantee that there's going to be someone in the firehouse in order to read all of these alarms. So if it happens at 2 a.m., even if we have a full-time fire member, we might not have a sleeper program.
Right.
And in addition to that, people are arguing the fire alarm system really needs to be updated and there are better systems out there for buildings to use.
Right. But not ones that help generate revenue for the town, a town that is starving to try and make costs of doing things like funding a fire department.
Yes.
Right. Just wanted to put that out there for a second. This same people who want to cut the fire department are also for cutting any revenues that might help fund the fire department. That leads us to another story where you were covering the Bellows Falls Village and their trustees meeting last week, hearing a couple of presentations from different solar contractors, and people can read this in the Friday edition of the Reformer or on reformer.com. And here comes James McAuliffe again with questions about these particular contracts and saving money or generating revenue for the village of Bellows Falls. What are some of his concerns with these proposals put forward by Green Lantern Group and Novus Solar?
So I think this thing that was also a little bit unclear to some trustee board members, which, to be fair, I mean, it's a lot of language going on here. But I think James McAuliffe's main concerns...
He goes by Jiggs. We're trying to use his full name here. Yeah.
I think his main concern has to do with after this contract is up, there is the option to buy the solar panels.
Right.
And I think he was just kind of unclear as to what that entailed and whether or not they would be contracted to have to buy the solar panels. And
especially because some of these solar panels aren't going to be located in the village of Bellows Falls.
yes, no, they're going to be actually located in Guilford,
Right.
which is kind of fun.
Yeah, Stephen Golick, another trustee, I think that's a good question. Why would the village of Bellows Falls want to own anything in Guilford? Good question, but there's nothing saying they have to own these solar panels in Bellows Falls, right?
Yes, there's nothing saying that they have to. And it's my understanding that if they did buy it, there could be some sort of energy benefits towards that because Vermont's trying to go by 2050, I believe. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
90%.
90% of all energy from renewables. And that leads to the point of why they're dealing with two different organizations here, why they can't just buy all their power from, say, Green Lantern or Novus. Talk a little about why they're blending those two together.
So they're blending those two together because the village has more energy needs than Green Lantern can provide them, and Green Lantern provides the best deal. But they're both really good deals because they're offering them more than 10% back on credits.
Right.
So right now the going rate, I think, is about 10%, and they're offering them 12 and 11%. So they're going to make Green Lantern their primary solar provider, and then they're going to try and switch, theoretically, if they sign this contract, they're going to switch the rest of their energy needs and put it in the Novus solar array.
And we're talking, if both these deals are accepted and implemented, about $16,000 a year in savings for the town, for the village of Bellows Falls there. And yet somebody's concerned about the aspect of it down the road. Somebody who's concerned about the money for Bellows Falls, one trustee voting against that idea. Always a fun time to hear about what's happening in the Bellows Falls, Rockingham area with you, Harmony. Any stories that you're working on this week that you want to tease with your byline?
Oh boy. Well, the kids fair should be coming out soon.
That'll
there
be
was
nice.
a kids fair, yeah, that was cool. And there's going to be something about a dam. There's something in Demerston with a dam.
Okay. So we'll keep an eye out for those, both in the print edition of the paper as well as on reformer.com. Thanks for your time this morning.
All right, thank you.
All right, and we will be back to wrap up this edition of the Green Mountain Mornings program right after these messages.